Welcome to Within You, the podcast. Yo soy Viviana. Y ahora ustedes van a estar, you're just going to be so in love. I'm very honored to have some time with Dr. Mario del Angel-Guevara. He is a professor for the University of New Mexico Curanderismo program. And literally, Mario, time with you is on my top 3 of the 11 years that I have been doing this podcast. So thank you so much for your time. I really wanted to just start with a general overview of the connection that I've made with the University of New Mexico with this program, and then open up to just a conversation, more of a heart-to-heart, and then go into some questions, because my heart has been broken open and my mind has just, there's so much curiosity and not enough time for everything that I want to learn. But about 10 years ago, I heard my grandmother, and ever since then I have been curious to reclaim my own heritage, my own culture. And for a long time there was this pain that can be summarized generally into no soy de aquí ni de allá. And I didn't feel like I had a place. And most recently, even though it's been a 10-year journey, I'll tell you that in the last 3 months, there has been this breaking open of a world that I am delighted to be dancing in. And it's been primarily through the programs offered through the University of New Mexico Curanderismo program and the experiences that you offer. And I am going to be an eternal student, God willing, alongside the offerings that you have. And with that, I just want to welcome you to, and thank you so much for your time in this space. And what is amazing to me is that in 2016, I began to do research in curanderismo. And for some reason, I never found the University of New Mexico. And so one of the primary purposes of our time together is, I imagine that there are several generations of women and men much like me who are looking for a way to reclaim, to remember, and to bring in their own cultural heritage. And it is so complicated and complex sometimes, but also so easy. And my primary intent is to invite people to learn about this program through you, learn more about you and about the offerings that are available. Because even though I actually went back and researched this, I had Cheto's book and bought it in 2000, Cheo's book in 2017. I never landed here. And so I don't want it to take 9 years for someone else. I want them to come straight to where the heart of curanderismo lives in the United States. And so thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Vivi. Thank you for having me. And yeah, well, I mean, I'm Mario del Angel-Guevara. I am from Monterrey, Mexico, originally. That's where I was born. That's where I was raised. That's where I went to school, all the way to college, until I was in my early 20s. That's when I came to the United States for the first time, right? But it wasn't until much later that I met Cheo. His real name is Eliseo, right? But we call him Cheo, or Dr. Cheo Torres, his last name. And he's the one that created this program. Not in New Mexico initially, as a matter of fact. He created this program in Texas, in South Texas. The University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, what used to be Pan American University. Cheo was in many places, in many universities, but mainly he was at the University of Texas, Kingsville also. That's where he even became interim president of that university. He held an international conference on traditional medicines of the world there as interim president. And he met a lot of the curanderos that we work with today. They came from Mexico and other countries. He met Dr. Arturo Ornelas. And after that conference that he held, he decided to create this program that initially was created in Texas, but then he moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he started or restarted the program in the new university. That he was now a vice president for student affairs. And this happened 25 years ago in the year 2000. And that's when the program started. Obviously, it wasn't that big. It didn't have as many components as it does today. And we hope it continues growing. It started with just a couple of classes, but sorry, actually started with only one class in the summer and only for university students, right? And over time, the class grew. It started incorporating other people, community members who were not necessarily studying in the university. Community members of many backgrounds were allowed to take this class in combination with the university students. And then in 2010, Cho went online also and created Curanderismo online courses when online education was becoming more popular. 2010, he created two more courses, but those were only for UNM students, University of New Mexico students. Until the year 2024, I was already working with Cheo and we decided to create continuing education courses that were online, not only in person, so that community members had access to Curanderismo courses in both modalities, in person and online, year round. Now, we even have a 1 year certificate on Curanderismo traditional medicine that students can receive after completion of the three courses, the summer, the fall, and the spring term courses for both UNM students and community members. So over time, it grows, it adds more components as we see the need. And also, we have the study abroad program in Oaxaca, and plans are to even include another one in Mexico City area, right? But something I think is important for me to say, Vivi, as a faculty member here at the University of New Mexico, is that when you work in a university, there is a process to do everything, and you need approvals from your superiors because there's a hierarchy also administratively and also academically. There's levels for professors, right? You have lecturers, level 1, 2, 3, assistant professors, tenure professors, associate professors, full professors, emeritus professors. So there's levels. And there's also administrative levels, like you can be the department chair, the college dean, right? Vice president, provost, president. And one of the challenges for me, Vivi, has been to make it easy to understand for people who are not in the university system that as much as we want to go super fast and make everything in 1 year, we are constrained in a way by the times that the university takes to review and to approve proposals, right? But even though it goes slow, once it is approved and it is offered as being part of a university system, I think it is very strong and it can reach out very far, very far out of the state, even to people in other countries. So I think it's worth it. The time we wait and all the revisions and the work that we put into writing our proposals and providing the evidence to support what we want to do is worth it once it's established, right? And an example of that is the class we have now that just started in the year 2000, right? And that's what we do. So we do. And by the way, we are in the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, the Curanderismo program. Curanderismo means traditional medicine. Now, there's many types of traditional medicines in the world, in the United States also. So people ask, well, which one is it? Another challenging lesson, we could say, at least at the beginning, is trying to make people understand and have an open mind and an open heart to be able not only to understand, but to accept that we are not boxes or categories to be divided and put in labels, right? We are much more mixed than we think we are, culturally, linguistically, ethnically. And people ask, well, is this indigenous? Is this Mexican? Well, there's a lot of indigenous roots in Mexican culture and in Mexican people, right? So curanderismo is the art of traditional healing, mainly from, and you're going to hear a lot of definitions. Some people might say Mexico. Some people might say Latin America. Some people might say the U.S. Southwest. Well, why not all of the above, right? Some people say, well, but I'm Navajo, I'm Lakota, I'm indigenous of the U.S. I have nothing to do with the Mexican people. Well, if you don't identify that, if you don't feel like curanderismo is enough, perhaps to define your practice, then don't use it. right? But what we do as a Mexican man who's in New Mexico, right, came from the old Mexico to New Mexico here in Albuquerque, what we do is curanderismo, right?
Well, one of the things that I can imagine is also challenging for you within the university system, and I had intended to mention this at the end, but it feels important enough to say then and now, is the idea around funding and the need for support from your community members and from the general population. So I'm going to ask directly for my listeners that feel any stir in their heart or in their spirit, or even if they take one of the free Coursera courses, any of the academic, the continuing ed courses, that they follow through with the appreciation that I know that they will have after they experience this, to also directly support your program. And I know that there is a specific link at the curanderismo.unm.edu site, but before we move on, can you just mention the significance of those individual and direct contributions to your program?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they make everything possible. They are very, very helpful. And universities, public universities, are nonprofits, which means that the income that they receive goes back to the community in scholarships, in infrastructure, in educational programs that some are free and some are not free, right? But in the salaries for the instructors, right? So the University of New Mexico is a nonprofit. And for being a nonprofit, right, it receives tax money from the state and from the federal government. And they have to go, and on top of that, it is also an Hispanic serving institution, an HSI. Not all universities are Hispanic serving institutions. They have to meet certain criteria to be able to run specific programs, right, for those populations and receive additional funding to serve those populations. The University of New Mexico is one of those Hispanic serving institutions. We have the Chicana and Chicano Studies Department. In other universities, that's called the Hispanic Studies Department. In other universities, it's even called his Mexican American Studies Department. In some universities, they don't even have a department. They only have a class or a program, but it's not a department. Here at the University of New Mexico, not only we do have a department of Chicano Studies, but we also have a master's degree and a PhD degree in Chicano Studies, right? And the curanderismo, we call it traditional medicine of Mexico in the U.S. Southwest. But as you know, and you've seen, we also include our curanderos from Central America, the Caribbean, South America, right? And also sometimes we invite people from Canada, from the First Nations, because they reach out to us and they want to come, even though technically the course is on Mexican American studies and practices that come from Mexico. This class has impacted so many people across countries that they reach out to us so that they can come and present, even if it has not much to do with our culture per se as Mexican Hispanic people. But indigenous people of Alaska and Canada, they have also been invited to participate when they reach out to us and express their desire to contribute to the program in the way they can, which we find it fascinating and wonderful. We wish they could also have their own right programs to teach this, and I know they may have their own challenges back home. So we're very fortunate and very blessed to be able to do this here in New Mexico. So the community donations are very good and very useful because it allows us to help the community much more than we can with what we receive from the university. We don't really receive much. Sometimes we don't receive anything. I'll be honest with you, on a yearly basis. Right? Some years we do, some years we don't receive anything. Right now, during this administration, we're not receiving anything because a lot of funds have been cut for ethnic studies programs, and we're considered an ethnic studies department. So a lot of scholarships for students have been cut. A lot of funding for research on ethnic studies also has been cut because that's now considered illegal, right? And I don't know if you know this, but the Trump administration sued the University of New Mexico recently for allegedly funding ethnic studies research that promotes hate towards non people who don't belong to those minority groups. That's their perspective, that's their narrative, right? So they did that, and the university told us all faculty that they're going to be much more conservative in how they spend funds. So we're going through very challenging times to keep these programs alive. And that's when the community donations come into play, and they become more important than ever before. Why is that? Because the very little funding that we receive, and not every year, we use it and we put it towards materials for the class for over 200 students that come, right? We get the materials for them, for the limpia, for the juice therapy sessions, for the cleansing sessions, for the promotional materials. We have to pay the lease of the spaces. We have to pay the university. Also, that's just another important thing. Not a lot of people know that the university charges the departments for using the facilities. The departments are like little entities, and the university is a big umbrella. But when departments want to have an event, they have to pay the university the rent for the chairs, the tables, the tents, the pickup, the drop off. Everything has to be paid. And the department is, you might wonder why some departments are so big and have new facilities, and some departments look like they haven't renovated their facilities in 30 years. That's why, because they have to pay for it out of their own funding. So we use it, we put it towards all of those costs, right? And also the flights for some of the international curanderos that come from Mexico and other countries. So we pay for their airfare. Sometimes, not always, we pay for their lodging, and not because we don't want to pay for everyone's, but because we can't. So we always try to prioritize who can stay with a friend, who can
Okay.
stay with a relative, and those who have no one else will take care of them, right? The greater the need, the greater the help. That's the priority. So everyone can have an opportunity to come and be here. Right. And then sometimes when we receive a grant, and we have received a couple of grants in the past, and we have used it for three main purposes. One is to do research, right? And to create textbooks for the students and the community members that they can keep learning about this, to document what we see, and also to create more courses, to record more videos. So that's for the creation of instructional materials. Some grants are only specific to that. You have to do that. But we have also received other grants that we have used to run community health fairs, traditional health fairs, where curanderos are invited and they provide traditional treatments. And at no cost, however, everybody's encouraged to give the curanderos, the practitioners, a donation. How much? How much you can give, right? And they do that. The community does that directly to them, right? And then so that's to run the health fair. But as the faculty and as the department, the leading department and the leading faculty member, we have to pay even for the mariachi that comes and wraps up the whole class. Right? They charge us. They don't play for free. We have to pay for the band. We have to pay for the sound system. We had to pay for the facilities, the rental of everything. And a lot of people think, I don't think they think about that, right? Maybe they think it's free because we're in a university and they'll give it to us for free. No, they charge us for all of that.
No,
I
yeah,
know.
thank you so much for giving us more context around that. And I just want to ask again directly, for those that are listening and for those who have an affinity and receive from the Coursera program or from the actual continuing ed, or even as students, that they click those donate buttons and make sure that they show their appreciation in a way
Hmm.
that sustains this program. So I just
Yes, yes. And we use it also for the scholarships for students. Student scholarships we also give. Of course, we are limited in how many we can give, but when we set aside some funds to give to students who cannot afford the tuition for the class, and when there's a scholarship application, and we send it to them, and then they fill it out, and it's on a need basis, right? There's a selection committee, and they have to select who has the greatest need for that given year, and unfortunately, we cannot give to everybody, right? We have more applicants than we have scholarships available, but we do give, and that comes from the community donations. Typically, a professional, practicing professional, may be a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a professor, who come to the class. As psychologists, we have a lot of psychologists. They make donations, and we use them for the students, right, who may not be working full time as they are full time students.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. You mentioned boxes and labels and how people don't recognize how mixed we actually are. One of the things that was um, eye-opening, heart-opening, opened me to a whole nother experience is I had an opportunity to hear from you very briefly on the history of Texas as we know it now. Because I'm a nerd and I love to go to school and I've taken all kinds of courses, anthropology, you name it. Like there's just no limit to what I'm curious about. But you very succinctly were able to create a very beautiful imagery and timeline around how Texas came to be and maybe why it is so challenging for us as Tejanas or Chicanas to find what we call either our roots or what mix we are and why that is even important to us because it's for me now looking back it is too much of a box, it's too much of a label, but before I wanted to find a name that describe me. And even mestiza doesn't encompass that. But would you take a moment, excuse me, would you take a moment to give me that sort of here's how we came to be Texas? And you did that from the cuff. You were so spirited and it was just there was so much passion that came through in your voice. I was hoping that you could tell me again so that I can listen to it over and over and share it with my own children and their children.
Hmm. Absolutely, baby, absolutely. And I know how important Texas, right, is for you as you're at Tejano. But I will say this, and I say this about Mexico as well. Texas is many Texas, just like Mexico is many Mexicos in one, right? It's not the same South Texas, right, than Texarkana area, right, or West Texas, right? It's a huge state, right? The largest in the contiguous United States. So Texas has an interesting history that's going to sound different based on who you ask to tell you the history of that place, right? Texas was not always named Texas. Now, I'm not going to talk about the indigenous peoples of Texas that I don't know much about. I'm going to talk about the colonial times and forward. Texas was, as we know, was the first Europeans that settled in Texas were the Spanish people before the Americans, before anyone else came westward, right? And as we know, Texas was a province of Mexico or a territory, one of the northern territories in Mexico. And it was a border state bordering bordering the United States to the north, right? And to the east. It was a territory in Mexico. Mexico at the time until 1846, 1847, had three territories in the north, which were Texas, which capital back then, the Mexican capital was San Antonio. Then New Mexico, which capital is still same, Santa Fe. And California, which capital was Monterey, California, with one R. Those were the three territories. But out of the three, the most populated one was New Mexico. Now it's the least populated of the three, but it was the most populated at the time. Texas was not very highly populated, and the government of Mexico, wanted to bring more settlers to that region. So what did they do? They invited people to come and populate it from the southeast, from the east in the United States. The Texas, the states next to Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, they invited them to come to Mexico in exchange for land and an opportunity to live there in the country of Mexico. This was in the 1820s and the 1830s. What happened? Mexico had three rules for those settlers. First, they had to convert to Catholicism. Second, they had to learn Spanish. And third, no slavery. They had no problem learning Spanish. They had no problem pretending to be Catholic, but they did sure have a problem with the slavery. They wanted it. And in Mexico, it was abolished in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, way before the United States. Now, the United States is not the country that held slavery for the longest or the latest. That was Brazil. But Mexico was one of the earliest countries in the Americas to abolish slavery. So as they came from a country where slavery was legal into a new country where slavery was illegal, They were not willing to change that. Now, if you ask a lot of Texan historians, and again, it depends who that person is, they might say that the reason why Texas became independent is because of the state rights and because the country of Mexico was centralized and they wanted local government. And it still is centralized in Mexico. Everybody responds to Mexico City. But in the US, yes, states have rights and they're a little bit more independent as compared to the states in Mexico. That led to a confrontation, an altercation between the Tejano Hispanos, the white Texans that came from the US, the South, and the Mexican government. What happened? They tried to become an independent country in 1835. First, they did not succeed in their attempt to secede from Mexico. Later, they would try to secede from the US also during the Civil War in the 1860s. But they were trying to secede from Mexico, and the president of Mexico at the time, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, sent the army to pacify, right, the protesters. And the Mexican army won. And a lot of people died, and this happened in a place called El Alamo. That's why people say, remember the Alamo, remember how we Tejanos were massacred. They went at it again. They protested again. They tried to become independent again. They rebelled again. The Mexican army went again to fight with them, but they lost this time. They were better prepared, and the Mexican army lost. The president of Mexico was arrested, who was also a general, and he was there. And they made him sign, who was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. But by the way, in Mexico, he's considered a traitor. He was a dictator. He was president for about 16 times. He was even exiled to Colombia for some time. And he signed the treaty, right, making Texas an independent country. But and this happened in 1836. Texas became a country for 10 years before it was annexed by the Union into the United States. In 1846, más o menos, right? But what happened at that time in 1846? The United States, under President Polk, decided to invade Mexico to fulfill this ideal of American grandeur, which was called the Manifest Destiny. It is a God-given mandate that this nation will become great and expand from shining sea to shining sea. But there was something in the middle that would prevent it. A country by the name of Mexico that owned that land. So the country of the United States invaded the country of Mexico in 1846, first taking the northern territories, taking Santa Fe, New Mexico, taking Monterey, California, they had already taken Texas. However, the problem with Texas is that the border was not very well defined. According to the Mexican government, the border with Texas was at the Rio Nueces, which is by Corpus Christi. But according to the United States, the Texan border was at the Rio Grande, which was further south. Guess who was a U.S. senator who was against the invasion of Mexico by the United States? Abraham Lincoln. He harshly criticized that invasion, among many other people who refused to pay taxes to fund a government who would invade a sister nation that had just become independent from an European kingdom, a European crown, just like the United States had done before. As soon as Mexico became independent, no longer under the Spanish crown, the United States attacked it and invaded it. And first with Texas, and then in 1846 with the whole what's known nowadays as the U.S. Southwest. But the border with Texas was always an issue. Where is the border? Texans say it's at the Rio Grande, Mexicans say it's at the Rio Nueces. So that part of Texas, which is South Texas, Laredo, McAllen, Texas, Harlingen, Edinburgh, Brownsville, all that, Falfurrias, that south of Texas, part of Texas, was disputed territory. But they had a plan. And this is documented, this is written in correspondence of the time and letters, that they would send American soldiers to be stationed in South Texas so that the Mexican army could attack them and then they could justify the invasion of the whole country. Why? Because the Mexican soldiers attacked Americans on U.S. soil, according to them. But the Mexicans thought of that land as Mexican soil. They ended up invading Mexico City in 1846, and in 1847, and in 1848, they signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which established a border, international border between the United States and Mexico. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo established the border between Texas and Mexico. However, Texas was also disputing some land that belonged to New Mexico. In other words, land that belonged to other U.S. territories. Texas claimed that their land expanded all the way to the Rio Grande, and as you know, in El Paso, Texas, and Las Cruces, New Mexico, the Rio Grande curls around and it starts going northbound. It's no longer the border, the Rio Grande. So the Rio Grande nowadays divides the state of New Mexico in east and west. But not only the state of New Mexico, also the city of Albuquerque is divided in the east side and the west side, divided by the Rio Grande, which starts in southern Colorado. Texas disputed eastern New Mexico as part of Texas because it's on this side of the Rio Grande, so it belongs to us. So Texan territory expanded all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Rio Grande, including half of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the eastern part of the state of New Mexico. However, they came to an agreement in 1850 and is known as the Compromise of 1850, in which New Mexico and Texas signed a treaty establishing the current state lines. That's not the end of it. In 1854, as the Americans started building the railroad, the cross-continental railroad to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, it had to go through the U.S. Southwest. But there was a problem. The mountains. They had to go around the mountains, and the best route to do that was to the south. But that was already Mexico. So once again, this time they didn't invade. They purchased another piece of land from Mexico known as La Mesilla Valley in 1854. It was the same president, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who sold it to the Americans. La Mesilla Valley is southern New Mexico and southern Arizona. Nowadays, Tucson, Arizona, and La Mesilla, New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas, is in La Mesilla Valley, which was sold to the U.S. in 1854. Americans call it the Gadsden Purchase because Gadsden was the ambassador to Mexico who made the purchase. The U.S. ambassador to Mexico who made the purchase. But in Mexico, we don't call it the Gadsden Purchase. We call it La Mesilla Sale. La Venta de la Mesilla. We call it La Mesilla is a town. And that's a wonderful historical town here in New Mexico that I visited a week ago with my wife, by the way. We went on vacation to Ruidoso, which is now flooded, unfortunately. But we went to La Mesilla, and when the Americans invaded northern Mexico, which now is the U.S. Southwest, they were given an option. If you remain in this land that you know to be your home, you will become a U.S. citizen overnight, and this will be the United States. New government, new language, new system of justice, new system of government. But if you want to remain a Mexican citizen, you need to move further south. So the Mexican government, during that change, called for all the people from northern New Mexico to move to La Mesilla to do a census. Who are the Mexicans that are moving? We'll give them land. So a group of New Mexicans from northern New Mexico moved south to La Mesilla to be relocated and remain in Mexico. However, in 1854, 6 years later, once again, they had to be relocated. And again, the Mexican government told them, sorry, the border is moving one more time, once again. If you want to stay in La Mesilla, you'll be a U.S. citizen. But if you want to remain a Mexican citizen in the country of Mexico, now you have to move further south again. And a lot of people did that, and they founded the town of Palomas in Chihuahua, which is right at the border in front of Columbus, New Mexico. Right. So in Texas, there's a history of conflict due to the land, due to the language, due to slavery, and due to the ethnic groups. Now, a lot of Texan historians will not acknowledge the reason why Texas wanted to become an independent nation was so they could maintain slavery as an institution in government and not have to abolish it as being part of Mexico, where it was illegal. That's why you have to read the history of Mexican historians, their research, their wonderful Mexican historians, the very professional work that they have done on Texas when it was part of Mexico. I'll recommend one reading for you. The name of the author is Paco Ignacio Taibo II, like the second, right? Paco Ignacio Taibo II. He wrote a wonderful book that talks about all of this, the history of Texas and the issue with the slavery and why Texas became independent so they could maintain slavery. And he's featured in a documentary by the History Channel where he goes to Texas and he confronts Texan historians and asks them, why don't you talk about slavery in your research? They avoid commenting on that, but he's very open about it. And Paco Ignacio Taibo II wrote this book, El Álamo, una historia no apta para Hollywood. In other words, El Álamo, a story not suitable for Hollywood. Right, that's the name of his book. I don't know if it's available in English. I know the original is in Spanish. It's published in Mexico, among many other publications that he has on the topic. But this is the main book that I would recommend. So Texas comes to be, in my opinion, some people might not like this, a mini version of the United States of that time, in the reflection of their desire to expand and take other states' lands and other countries' lands and other people's lands and enslave other people who are not as valuable or as human as they were considered to be at that time. That's the history of Texas, among many other wonderful good things that Texas has. But this is part of the history and our history that's not taught about in schools as much as we should be discussing it. Right? So Texas has a rich history. But as I said at the beginning, Texas is many Texas in its own for many reasons. It depends on who you're asking. Some people think the Texas Rangers are wonderful saviors. And some of us don't think that, don't we? Right? So it all just depends on who you ask. Right? There's books about the lynching of Mexicans, the lynching of African Americans in Texas. There's many books about the topics. These topics. The information is available. The research has been done. The information is there. All you need to do is look for it and take the time and put the effort into learning.
Thank you, Mario. And one of the things that I have, I guess, healed from or understood a little bit better that used to be a very sensitive topic for me is that my parents, I was born in the early 70s, and they made a very concerted effort to try to assimilate me. And I remember I have memories of my grandmother being angry at my father. And what I realize now is that she couldn't speak to me because she didn't know English and they wouldn't teach me Spanish. And part of that, I believe, and in my conversations with them, was that so I could be more successful in this country because they experienced racism and difficulties in, that hierarchy, that caste system that seems to exist with, the way you speak, the way you look, your education level and that sort of thing. And so on one hand, I don't know if it helped or not, but I can say that I feel like I'm successful in the Western world's opinion of what success looks like on the outside. But on the other hand, over the last 10 years, 15 years especially, it has been a struggle to find my own self and to understand exactly the kinds of things that you're mentioning, because now I understand the tension, the difficulty, the struggle that our grandparents, great grandparents, and great great grandparents went through, not being being mestizo or mixed or whatever title or box was put on them. They knew that they were different, and they specifically tried to make me more like, the I don't know what else to say, but to make me more white, more like the white people. And it's been a real effort to find, quién soy, and who my parents and grandparents and grandparents were. And I'm not even 1% of that, but I have found healing and going to the arroyos that my grandmother grew up in, Rio Doso, Texas, a very, very small town with beautiful, healing waters and cottonwoods, and really finding her spirit there and bringing it home with me.
Texas is a beautiful land, and we need to show that, right? But part of that is accepting what's been done, right? We want healing. We need to accept. We need to acknowledge. We can live in denial. That's not healing. And what you're talking about with your grandma and finding out who quién soy, who am I, where do I come from? That's Let me start by saying that's normal. First of all, it is a common story, not only in Texas, but in most of the U.S. Southwest, in California, in New Mexico for sure, in Arizona, in other places, and not only in the Southwest, all over the United States, with other populations, with the Native Americans, with the African Americans. I don't like making comparisons, but we keep our names, baby,
Mm,
our last names.
mm-hmm,
Other people do not even know their last names. They were given new last names, right? We speak our language. Some of us do. And even if we don't, we can go to school and learn it. Mexico is right here. We can go to Spanish school in college. We can learn it. Our grandparents speak it. Some populations in this country, the grandparents, not even them can tell them.
mm-hmm.
This has happened to a lot of peoples and groups in this country. We're one of them. One of them. And we share that in common with other people who maybe had nothing to do with us, right? But now they do. And we're able to connect and understand each other in that on that base. And with what you're saying about who am I, that's why it's so important to speak and have conversations with our elders, with our abuelos, your abuelito, your abuelita. It doesn't have to be your blood relative, with an elder person that shares that history, that background with you. A friend, a community, a person in your community, an elder, they know so much. And we can learn so much from them. And in particular about this topic, who are we and where do we come from? They are the ones to go to. Right. And there's no easy answer or something to say about. But my parents wanted to make me more white. My parents wanted me to assimilate. My parents wanted me to speak better English than the gringos, I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not gonna judge them.
Right.
What I can say is I believe that they were responding to the challenges of their time. They may have done something right or wrong, but what I know is that they wanted the best for us. They didn't come from a bad place. I think they wanted us safe and happy and thriving and successful. Now, was that the best way to do it? I don't know. We also need to be understanding and empathetic to our own parents who are not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
No, we are not going to pretend we know what it felt like to live those times. They did their part. We had the civil rights movement, among many other things. Not only that, de Cesar Chavez and con Martin Luther King Jr. y todos las personas. Imagine how many people we don't know about. We know about them because they were really big and popular, but imagine how many people contributed to that. So as to, so that a nation could change like that.
Mm-hmm.
and make our lives better. Now, on the one hand, we could say they wanted me to learn English and be assimilated to be more white, but on the other hand, they did demand the right to vote, the right to speak, the right to have better jobs, the right to have a loan, the right to have to own, to carry arms too if they wanted to have loans, to start businesses. They also fought for that, and let's not forget it. Remember the ometeot,
Mm-hmm.
the duality.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's always another side. There's the duality in everything. Look for it. It's all good, it's all bad. Not that, there's always a little bit of both. And even if we can label it as something bad, what was it right for them to do this to me? We don't know, but I'm not sure they knew either. What I think we know is what they wanted for us. But that's why we do this. Our role, our duty now is to reclaim it, is to educate our people, is to empower our people. And that's our part. Now,
Amen.
our parents, maybe they are viejitos now. They won't be doing that kind of work, but we're young. And it's our duty so that our children now know what we didn't learn,
Yes.
that we got to learn later in life. Does that make sense? I think that's a
Absolutely.
more positive
I
view.
I
Uh-huh.
think that is a beautiful way to show Ometeo, to give both sides. And what I want to say to the listeners that resonate with this is something that you mentioned was that it is a common experience. And that is, I think, what was the most painful piece for me is that unfortunately, as I was moving through this, I moved through it by myself. And there's no reason for anyone listening to this that feels like they're experiencing this in any way to do this alone because tienes primas, tienes cousins, you have family. And like you said, they don't have to be blood related because, and I had this quote because it resonated so deeply with me. Either you said it or it was said by a presenter in the summer program. We're cousins in continuous conversation with various variations of our own traditions. And in that context, we were talking about traditional medicine, but I think in general, the thing that is so beautiful that you just said is that we have things in common. Look for that commonality and look for those connections because I believe that we, we're humans. And there's one of the songs that Maestro Lorenzo sang that says, para llegar a Dios tienes que aprender a ser humano. And it resonated with me so deeply because my teaching centers around love being human, and it is basically the same thing. You have to learn how to be a human in this body. It's a practice that isn't taught in school that we have to take on the responsibility of doing. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, Vivian. Thank you for your wonderful questions. You get me started, you know me, and I
I
can
love it.
help it but to tell
Yes,
you.
I'm at your feet, professor. There's a,
I'm in the right profession, I think.
absolutely, absolutely. It's a gift that we appreciate very much. One of the other things that I wrote down that I hope, through your experience, 25 years of the Curanderismo program is something to be so proud of. Um, you talk about the common experience, and one of the things that I have heard just recently from several students and comadres that I have met through the University of New Mexico's immersion program is this idea of reclamation of our ancestral practice and ancestral wisdom. Can you just speak in general, either your opinion or voices that you've heard from students around that concept?
Well, yes, of course. A lot of students come here seeking that. But to them it's a need. It's not just for the pleasure of learning. It's not just because they want to know more, which they do, but it's something deeper than that. They're seeking something that's missing in them, that they feel is missing, something they don't understand about themselves, something, a part of them that's been neglected, a part of them that's sort of unknown, that they haven't turned around and looked at directly because they don't know what to do. They don't know where it is. They don't know what it looks like, but they know there's something there that they are missing, they're needing. And I believe that one of the reasons why students find this a very transforming, and very enlightening, I could use many adjectives, very impacting experience, is because it's not just because they like it. It's because for many of these people, they needed it. And it feels different when you receive something that you like or that you want versus something that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you receive something that you need, if you don't have it, you're in a state of distress, maybe worry. You don't feel good. You don't feel fully complete if you need it. It's not just that you want it or that you like it. It feels different when you receive something that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've observed in a lot of students, and it doesn't matter the age. You can, as you remember, we can have people that are very young in their teens and people who are in their 60s or 70s that come with us from all walks of life in different backgrounds and different ages and educational backgrounds and professions and perspectives and political ideologies and all sorts of backgrounds that I believe shows how it doesn't matter. It will still help you. It doesn't matter what you believe in politically, where you are financially, linguistically, if you speak or don't speak the language. That doesn't matter. And it shows you how that is more superficial
Mm-hmm.
than your roots. Your roots are much more important. And you receive the medicine that you needed. And part of that medicine is the word, is the knowledge. It's not just the treatments that we do. It's not just the temazcal, the sweat lodge. It's not just the
Mm-hmm.
limpias, which are the physical part visible, but it's the change in your heart, it's the openness in your mind, it's the direction and the guide that you were looking for, it's the reassurance that you do belong,
Mm-hmm.
that you come from a long line of people who are doing good and helping others and doing experimentation and doing building wonderful pyramids like we went see, that were writing books 500 years ago about plant medicine, and you learn about things that make you proud of who you are. You want to be what you look like. You don't want to keep playing the game of pretending you are who you are not.
Mm-hmm.
Because deep down, and this is my bias, I'll put it that way. And my bias comes from years of observations of different people. I do this multiple times a year and I meet wonderful people. And it's a bias, but it's based on my observations over the years. I think people know who they are,
Mm-hmm.
but they are not sure because they've been hearing one thing, but they are feeling something else.
Mm-hmm.
They've been told, they've been taught, you have to do this, you have to sound like this, you have to speak like this, you have to do things this way. Dad, but my grandma doesn't do it like that. And I come from her. My nana. Na means mother, and nana means mother of the mother. Grandma, my nana.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't do it like that. And I come from her. And things we start realizing from our childhood, it's not making a lot of sense. We've been eating tortillas for millennia. What's wrong about that? Chiles. What's wrong about? Why should I not be proud of where I come from? Not that I'm better than anyone else, not at all. But I shouldn't feel less than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So if my dad tells me I should be like other people, but he comes from a woman who's very different and he learned from her, doesn't he respect her mother
Absolutely.
to
Mm-hmm.
show to teach me what he was taught from her? So I think people consciously or unconsciously have this conflict that things don't add up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But when we go and learn about our history, our traditions, our ways, it's like a boost in the reassurance of who we are. And sometimes we need to be told, yeah, and reassured, you are a, a beautiful woman, you're a wise woman, you are a successful woman, you are a hardworking entrepreneur. And we like hearing those things and we believe it. And it gives us the ganas not to continue and to keep going. Just like a business, for example, could have a financial struggle or could struggle at times, or when we're in college, some years can be really difficult. A marriage has some times that struggles. I think culturally it's very similar. In
Mm-hmm.
my Mexicanity, Hispanicity, or whatever you want to call it, sometimes I'm gonna struggle with it. Am I not? Am I enough? And that's okay to struggle with it. So we go and seek what can help us. And people come and find us because I think they know what they need. That's my bias. I'll put it that way, maybe, because it's not a universal truth, right? We don't speak in those terms. It's what I believe, what I've from my observations on how it impacted people. Not only in Texas, a lot of people from New Mexico have a similar story as yours,
Mm-hmm.
and they tell me the same
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. Oh my gosh, mi abuelita en español en Taos, en Santa Fe, en Chimayo, en Albuquerque, right? We used to speak my dad, I see my parents speaking Spanish to my grandparents, but why can I do that? They never taught me. Bueno, pero there are other people that can teach you in your same community, and you can also learn from by yourself by taking classes, and you can also go to Mexico and learn, and you can go to, I mean, you can live in El Paso and you learn Spanish. It's in the US, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Right. Hmm.
Yes, that's beautiful, Mario. And I want to speak to your point of ganas. And again, for listeners who are in any part of this journey, especially for those who feel this unconscious. There's this missing piece that they don't even know how to actualize or what it is. That cultural piece is something that I think we need to give more attention to, and I'm very, very grateful for your work, for the department's work, and for the University of New Mexico's commitment to its HSI values and principles. I cannot believe that we have almost been talking an hour. It feels like 5 minutes. But out of respect for your time, I think I have one last question, and that is, what would you say to other people? Because this is not just women, it's men. And like you said, it's ages from teens to 70s and 80s. What would you say in general to someone that in general, what would you say? And I would that's my question.
I would say remember that la cultura cura,
Mm.
culture heals.
Mhm.
Not all medicines are in a pill form, and not all medicines are in physical form. Medicine can come in many ways, in many forms, in many shapes. The word that we give to others can be medicine for the heart. The energy, remember, Curanderismo, three-level holistic type of healing, body, mind, and spirit.
Mhm.
Now, an emotional wound for sure hurts as much as a physical wound, or even worse, because a physical wound may heal relatively soon, maybe a few months if it's an injury, but an emotional wound can last for many, many years, even across generations.
Mhm.
Let's not neglect that, right? So let's remember that la cultura cura. And if we become parents, or with our friends, or with our students, let's teach our children that. Let's reclaim it. And if we criticize at some point that our parents didn't do that, then let's be the ones that do with our own children, right? So la cultura cura, I think, is what I would like people to remember.
Oh, thank you, Mario. And I am definitely picking up that mantle. I'm looking forward to being Bibi Buela at some point soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also about the language, Vivi. Remember that, I mean, I would dream of Mexico and the US, that most people in Mexico spoke both languages, and most people in the United States spoke both languages, right? That we spoke English and Spanish and Spanglish back and forth as we felt like, and we understood each other. And although my mom doesn't speak English, and she's had conversations with people who don't speak Spanish, just with their body language and their facial gestures, right? They can still speak, or not speak, but communicate,
Mhm.
even though they don't really speak the same language, because communication goes beyond that. Bilingualism is a rule. Sp- Speaking both languages. Bilingualism has always been the rule, even with native communities. And monolingualism, speaking one language, has always and continues to be the exception. Tell that to your parents if they don't want you to speak
Oh,
Spanish
they've
or
changed their
learn.
mind and ideas over the years, but
See, they learn
they
too.
do. They did. They did. Thank you, Mario. I want to mention that the resources that you've talked about are going to be in the show, what we call the show notes. They'll be in the written overview of this podcast episode. I'm going to have a link, if I can find it, to the history of Texas by the author that you mentioned, and also a direct link to the donate button, so that folks that resonate with this can contribute directly to the Curanderismo program.
Absolutely. And I would like to invite everybody to come and check the website, curanderismo.unm.edu. We hold classes year round, once a year in person in the summer. And here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the University of New Mexico. And we do the study abroad programs, Curanderismo Immersion, where people go and see how curanderos make their medicine and treat their patients in communities where they live. We go to where they live in Oaxaca twice a year. So thank you so much, Vivi, for giving me the opportunity, the time, and the space to talk about these topics that I love, you know.
And it is my honor to host you, and thank you so much for your time. For the listeners at Within University and within you, ay Dios. You have been blessed by Mario's words, by Mario's wisdom, and I encourage you to reach out and to connect with the program, with him as a professor, and to contribute to this program monetarily if it is within your need, within your ability. To everyone listening, may you be well.